Hello. We have 5 days to go to the EU referendum. It's increasingly being sort of coined the Brexit debate, which I think isn't entirely impartial because Brexit insinuates leaving. I don't think that should be the right name for this, let's say, event. Let's call it what it is, the EU referendum. I know it's longer to say, but that's what it is. Brexit implies that it's the the UK leaving the EU, and that then suggests to the world that we all want out, which isn't the case. Um, yeah, 5 days ago, and I'll be quite honest, I still haven't voted. What I want to do in this video is just lay out some of my feelings right now. There has been a lot going on and a lot to talk about, and I find for many of those of us who are undecided, we're bombarded with so much information that if you're someone who genuinely sees good and bad from both arguments, it's sincerely hard to know what is the right choice. And I'm someone who does take voting seriously. It's not something that I do casually. I always take my vote seriously, even at council level. I take it seriously. It's something we can't take for granted. And every vote does count. I do believe in that principle. So for this video, I'm not going to lay out which way I'm going to vote because I honestly haven't decided. I will say one thing as a sort of disclaimer. I've made a few videos on the subject, and people have obviously left messages because it's a big issue and people feel strongly about it. That's fine. I totally understand that. But I would ask a few things. Firstly, I don't want anyone to try and impose how on me what they you know so I don't want to see messages like vote leave or vote remain, big block capitals. I've seen that occasionally, not so much on my channel, but on other forums, and it's irritating. I know people feel strongly, but you're not going to win over arguments by imposing your views on others. So for undecideds like me, the best way is to convince me by reasoned by reasoned points. Most of the comments on my channel on this subject have been civil, I'm pleased to say, but I do understand that people get strong views on this, and that is understandable because it is such an important issue. I actually don't think this will change our country as much as a potential Scottish referendum would. I still believe the Scottish referendum had the potential to change the country more because that was about the very, very foundation of the country. The union is much older than our membership of the EU, so I still believe that was a more historically important event. I do believe that if we leave, things are not going to change overnight. It's not going to be a case that suddenly we're isolated in one night. Um, I've been seeing sound bites from both sides that have been irritating. But to be fair, both campaigns are big, so you can't. I don't think it's fair to blame an entire campaign because of the reckless comment of one individual. So, for example, when Donald Tusk said that if Britain leaves the EU, it's a collapse of Western civilization. I don't think it's fair to blame David Cameron for what Donald Tusk said. Likewise, I don't think it's fair to blame Boris Johnson or Michael Gove for something another Brexiteer says. So people are responsible for their own words. You can't blame an entire campaign for that. These are both very large campaigns involving a very large number of people. I think that's a point that a lot of people are missing. They're both large campaigns involving a large number of people. Obviously, the traction of this has really been blown by the news of what happened to Joe Cox. There are people who actually someone raised this issue on my previous video about the LBC London Radio DJ presenter James O'Brien making a statement to the effect. I haven't seen it yet, but apparently made quite a partisan statement in light of that. To be honest, it's going to be difficult for people not to make political statements. In the day after that awful news, there was a lot of unity, which was nice to see. But to be honest, it's inevitable coming so close to referendum day that it's going to be hard for people on both sides not to, on some level, politicize this. There will be some on the Remain side some who use it to their advantage, and who try to dismiss the entire Leave side as fanatics. There will be some on the Leave side who also use it to their advantage. I've seen conspiracy theories coming out. It's really sad that this young woman's death is being used by either side for those cynical reasons, but it's also not very surprising. Um, a quick update about that. There's a lot being said about this. Clearly, this guy is a terrorist. I believe we should call him that. He was motivated by far right ideology. Everything that has been revealed about his background strongly indicates that. He gave his name in court as Death to Traitors. This guy's our very own Anders Breivik. I wouldn't be surprised if he had the capability to do it. He would have carried out a major attack, Anders Breivik style. I've little doubt about that. This is a man who brutally killed an unarmed woman in the street. Now, he killed one person, but you know that sort of mentality that drove him to do that. Um, we shouldn't underestimate that there is a potential for far right terrorism out there. There has rightly been a lot of focus on Islamist terror, and I still absolutely 100% say that this is a big problem. Islamist terror is a big problem, and I think the left um, has overlooked that for too long. But that doesn't mean that there isn't also a threat from other factions, such as far right factions. Now, Britain First has been quick to say they had nothing to do with it. That's becoming more dubious. There was a photo that showed him at one of their rallies. I'm not going to make this whole video about Britain First. I'm going to reserve that for another video because that is something I want to talk about. But I do think Britain First has been reckless in the way they have gone about their arguments. Um, Certainly, their leadership hasn't called for violence against left wing politicians. However, their leadership has called for direct action against elected Muslim officials, like Sadiq Khan. Now, to me, that's borderline incitement to violence. And I don't think you could gloss it over any other way. Um, so there is a toxic atmosphere in this country that we need to be very, very careful about. I know that people have strong views on this, and it would be strange, to be honest, if they didn't. Sometimes I have strong views on some of the particular issues, but people need to just step back a little bit and remember that in the end of the day, we're all British. Um, because if we don't, this thing is going to divide this country irreversibly. I will say one thing, and the purpose of this video is not to lay out why I'm voting one way or another because I haven't decided. The purpose of this video is, as the title will suggest, to express how I feel at this time about the issues. At this particular time, the 19th of June 2016. Um, I have many, many concerns about both sides. I really do. There's been a lot said about politicians scaremongering. I'm not sure if that's entirely fair. Both sides have made passionate arguments. That is not the same as scaremongering. It's true there has been reckless sound bites from both sides. The Leave side has been insinuating that 88 million people are going to suddenly come into Britain because that's a collective population of the countries that would enter. That's clearly scaremongering in that sense because it implies that we're going to get 88 million people overnight. And the Remain side has also been scaremongering by warning about conflict and so on if we leave. Um, but most of the arguments, I think, have been balanced arguments. And to be honest, I still maintain that the media has been largely responsible for fueling this criticism. The disgraceful way in which some of the debate has been handled, I absolutely maintain that. And I'm still angry about that, to be quite honest, about the way the likes of Sky News handled the debate events. I really believe that the media, and frankly, they're being somewhat two-faced with all these tributes to Joe Cox. But leading up to that event, The media is hugely responsible for fueling dislike and cynicism against politicians. Media pundits make their living off attacking politicians. And there's a lot of hypocrites out there who are, saying that they care about what has happened to this MP, but they have themselves been responsible for fueling hatred against politicians. That's what has caused the atmosphere that has led to this MP's death. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who hates or complains about politicians is going to do that. Of course, I'm not saying that. But it does breed an atmosphere of resentment. And it breeds an atmosphere where people are only looking at the negative and are not looking at the huge amount of positive work that elected representatives do. And they do. They do. I get so fed up with people saying, oh, they're all the same, they're all in it for themselves. A quick point about that. If they're all in it for themselves, what exactly are they in it for? It's not the most lucrative career by any means in terms of revenue. I mean, if you want to make a lot of money, becoming a sports person, a media executive, um, being involved in advertising, being involved in the financial sector, being involved in acting. There's any number of paths that make a lot more money than politicians do. There's many people in this country that get a lot more money than the Prime Minister does. So it's not the most lucrative career money wise. Is it comfortable? Sure, it's comfortable, but it's not the vast amount of money that people think it is. Um, for prestige, for power, well, the power of politicians is is questionable. I would argue the biggest power in this country is the media. Sure, ministers have a quite a degree of power, but it's not absolute power. Um, Fame, attention, I don't know about that because most of it is negative attention. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't. No matter what they do, they will be criticised. So when people say they're all in it for themselves, I'm wondering, well, what exactly, what is it that they're in for? If that's your position, what do you assume that they're getting from it, other than the things I've said? Yes, it's a comfortable salary, and yes, it's a certain degree of power, but they're the only two perks that I can really see. I mean, there's other professions that get an equal or larger amount of money that are not scrutinised anywhere near as much. Doctors get as much as MPs, but individual doctors don't get the enormous amount of criticism that MPs do. So, this is something that people overlook. And I really, really feel frustrated. And by the way, I'm not just saying this because of what has happened to Joe Cox. I've been saying this for years. I've been consistent in this area. If you don't believe me, look at some of my older videos. I've been consistent in saying that as a nation, we're frankly too hard on our politicians. In the end of the day, these are people trying to do a very difficult job. They have to please everyone all the time. I mean, they don't, but you know what I'm saying. They're in a position where no matter what they do, they will be criticised. Just for once, we need to be backing our elected representatives when we agree with them. In a democracy, you have to allow space for people to dissent, space for people to be angry, space for people to criticise. But I don't believe it's an asset to democracy when the media is constantly promoting cynicism. Number one, how are you going to inspire future parliamentarians? Young people who are interested in politics are going to look at this and say, well, that's not appealing. Why would I want to put myself into a position where no matter what I do, I will be criticised? These are important questions. And and it really is. I feel like I'm in the minority by saying this because there seems to be an enormous proportion of people who just want to complain and criticise. And this goes beyond party politics. This is something that affects all the parties. They just want to complain and criticise without really considering how hard these people's job is. You know, they're in a position almost unique where they're making decisions that impact other people's lives, but they are constantly under the microscope. And I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case. It should be transparent. Otherwise, we'd have a situation like China where, they could do what they want and there's no media to scrutinize them because in a country like China, that's just one example. There's other examples. The media is absolutely 100% controlled by the state. You know, it's sort of like in China, the politicians control the media. In the West, the media controls the politicians. Both ways are wrong. Both ways are wrong. Um, but anyway, back to the specific issues of the EU referendum. One of the major issues, I would say probably the most single biggest thing that is impacting people's thinking on this is the migrant crisis. Now, to those on the solid left, the issue is about compassion for refugees. It's about being a compassionate nation, helping those who are suffering, and so on. And I understand this to some extent. You know, you'd have to be a pretty cold bastard not to have some human compassion for people who've genuinely fled a war zone. But at the same time, I think the left is somewhat naive to. And one thing that has annoyed me about some on the Remain side, and I've called them out for this when they've said it, you cannot simply dismiss people who want to leave the EU as racists. This is lazy, this is misguided, and this is it's just wrong. Nigel Farage only this week has actually been defending Romani people in a statement to Andrew Neil yesterday. Um, his interview, he said that Romania and Bulgaria have been persecuting the Roma people. Now, what sort of racist stands up for Roma people? You might say he's only doing it for himself or whatever, but the point is he's saying that. I have never honestly seen Nigel Farage personally say something that can honestly be construed as racist in the sense of looking at another race in an inferior way, which is the definition of racist. I do think UKIP has been reckless at times. I do think they've been guilty of some pretty crude and tactless, even vile advertising at times. But personally, racist? No, I don't think he is. Um, so I do get annoyed with some on the Remain side who just want to slavishly dismiss everyone who wants to leave as a racist. That's completely unfair. Michael Gove is no racist. Michael Gove has been making many pro-immigration statements. He's just arguing there should be more pro-immigration from Commonwealth countries as opposed to the EU. But by the same token, it is wrong for the Leave side constantly dismiss those on the Remain camp as elitists. Look, people need to step back and be responsible for what they're saying. And I include myself in this. I haven't always been diplomatic, and I, hand on heart, say that. I will try to be more responsible in the things that I say as well. Both sides need to show more responsibility. And by both sides, I'm not just talking about the politicians and the leaders, I'm talking about citizens as well. You know, we're not children. We also have responsibility in the things that we say and do. Um, I will say one thing. I think the SNP, another irritation I have on my own side, I am more, I am more pro Remain at this stage. But I'm very frustrated by this notion that the SNP has that if the UK votes to leave the EU, Nicola Sturgeon's going to supersede the British government and go direct to Brussels. Number one, she's going to get a surprise because the EU has already said that any country wishing to re enter as its own entity would have to go through a whole process which would potentially take years. Look at how long Turkey has had to apply. So if Nicola Sturgeon thinks that the EU is just going to let Scotland back in, that's she's incredibly naive. But also, it shows a profound arrogance insofar as the SNP think that they can just disregard constitutional, legal, and democratic um, norms that has been established in recent years for the UK. Scotland, at this time, is part of the United Kingdom. The SNP has to accept that. I am someone who is more pro Remain, but I'm also a staunch unionist. And I was far more solid on the union issue than I am on this. So I will be furious, quite frankly, if Nicola Sturgeon tries that, because this country is already getting divided. And to me, that would be pure sectarianism on her part to basically ignore the will of the United Kingdom and say, oh, we're going to ignore everyone else. The Scottish people made it clear in that referendum that they wanted to stay in the Union. She can try and find some way to say, oh, but they've changed their mind since then, or whatever. In the end of the day, the SNP is a divisive party with a divisive agenda, and no one can honestly look at their agenda and say that it isn't. By definition, that's what it is. It is a separatist party with a separatist goal. Now, Nicola Sturgeon always says, oh, I'm not anti-English. That's not the issue, though. The issue is that the SNP is anti-United Kingdom. That's not scaremongering. That is what they are. So, although I'm more pro-Remain, I'm furious with the way the SNP has been. Well, I should say at this point I'm not furious, but I will be if they go ahead with this. I'm unhappy with the way the SNP has been making threats. I mean, on one issue that they're united, I mean, David Cameron and Nicola Sturgeon, instead of backing him for bipartisan reasons, she has been attacking him. And this is the whole essence of the SNP. You know, in Scotland, they have been driving sectarianism by saying that Labour is tartan Tories. They've been doing this the whole time. And I have contempt for the way the SNP goes about their business. They play good cop, bad cop. When they're in Westminster, they talk diplomatically, they talk about social democratic issues in society and so on. But fundamentally, the SNP exist. They exist to break up the United Kingdom in the same way that the UKIP exists for Britain to leave the EU. Incidentally, that's a practical issue. If we do leave the EU, I do wonder what will happen to UKIP. I mean, essentially, they will have served their purpose. So presumably they'll fizzle out. I don't know what Nigel Farage will do. I mean, their purpose is to leave the EU. If we leave the EU, they've achieved their objective. So that's an interesting question. Border controls on Northern Ireland will be another one because if we're outside EU as a bloc and the Republic of Ireland stays in, there has been concerns that will then raise border issues on the. I'm not so sure about that. I think things have greatly improved in Northern Ireland, with the exception of a small amount of losers who want the conflict to continue. But basically, there is so many issues going on here. I spoke. I'm even interrupting myself here because there's so many things to think about. The migrant crisis. Well, one of the main issues with that is how many people are genuine refugees, how many are economic migrants. I do think the left is being a bit naive. I think there are people exploiting the system because they see Europe as a soft touch and they want to get in. We have to control our borders, and that is no way racist. And I'm sick and tired of some on the left insinuating that it is. That's reckless. Saying that those who want immigration controls are horrible fascists. Look, there are racists, of course there are. But the majority of people just want stronger controls. That's completely reasonable. When you see what happens in Cologne, when you see what happens, I'll give credit where credit is due. There was a left wing guy from Scotland. He made a video where he admitted that he was more guilty of condemning, right wing groups in the UK than he was of condemning Islamist thinking. And there is this inconsistency among some on the left. Um, so there's so much going on. We're being bombarded by left, right, all this information from both sides. So much to take in. One thing I will close this video with, and it's just something that I've heard, and it kind of irritates me. A lot of the comments on the UKIP page has been, oh, what about all these young men of fighting age? Of fighting age. This is something that rubs me up the wrong way, and I'm going to explain why. I fully understand that there is a problem with some young men coming into Europe and they have a certain set of values that contradicts European values, especially regarding the treatment of women and, yeah, especially regarding the treatment of women. That is a very, very important question. But when people talk about young men of fighting age, what they're basically saying is that young men are dispendable, that they're expendable, I should say. That irritates me. It's a 1916 mentality. It's basically the same mentality that got young men killed in the trenches in World War One. The reason this irritates me is because it's short-sighted. What they're looking at is that there are a lot of young men coming over. Well, in many cases, the women folk have left before they have. That's one issue. Number two, this is not a conventional war. The war in Syria is not a simple black and white issue of two standing armies facing off. This is your choice if you're a man in Syria. Fight for Assad, kill civilians with barrel bombs. Fight for one of the various Islamist groups, kill civilians with any number of gruesome methods. Now, all this focus on values, if you are a decent Syrian man who doesn't want to kill civilians, what sort of choice is that? All those who are saying, oh, they should stay there and fight for the country. Wait a second. Look at what's going on in Syria. The Assad regime has ruthlessly been murdering civilians since the start. The various rebel groups, now many of them it's very difficult to see who the moderates are, have been murdering civilians as well. This is a brutal, ugly war. And to simply insinuate, oh, they should stay and fight. Well, my question is, fight for who? Which side? Given that both sides have been carrying out atrocities. So I think it's very, very easy to sit in a country like the UK and pass judgment. And I think it's very, very. I don't like that attitude at all. I mean, you need to look at that. It's not a conventional war. And it's very easy to judge Syrian men and say, oh, they're just. And this is one of the main tropes coming out against the anti migrant argument. And it irritates me. And it is also basically saying that young men are expendable. Now, it's completely legitimate to question and to have strict vetoes on those who are coming in. That is essential. That's why we do need to lower the numbers. But the implication that young men are expendable, that irritates me. And I think it is a very, very callous attitude, to be quite frank. This is not a conventional war, which means it is not a simple situation that a lot of the Syrian men who are coming over are doctors, they're lawyers, they've no military experience. They're not professional soldiers. So it's all very well just saying, when what you're essentially saying is, let's say this is 1914. The overwhelming neo nationalistic attitude of that time was to basically shame young men into going into the trenches. They ended up as cannon fodder. Now, the argument of those saying, oh, these fighting age men should be back home, the people who say that seem to be incredibly ignorant about what exactly is happening in Syria. Because what side do they fight for? It's all very well saying they should fight for the country, but fight for a brutal dictator who's murdering his own people? Fight for, ragtag rebel groups, many with Islamist ideologies, whose attitude to human rights is equally abhorrent? Who do they fight for? If you are a liberal or moderate Syrian, who do you fight for? You could argue they could stay and join the White Helmets, who are some of the bravest people in the world, but there are no easy answers to this, and people need to stop making these sweeping statements. It really irritates me. Anyway, I have thrown out an awful lot of information with this video. It's definitely not going to be the last video I make on this issue. Apologies that it isn't very well structured. That was basically the point. I just wanted to give my raw, honest feelings at this point. If you disagree with anything I'm saying, all I would say is I think I've made quite a neutral case with this video. I have looked at both sides and I haven't, I've tried to be as fair as possible. So by all means, feel free to comment on my video, but don't kind of pigeonhole me and say that, oh, well, what about this, Nathan, or what about that? I'm a guy who's genuinely undecided, and I understand arguments from both sides. I really do. I don't mind people offering their views to me and saying, well, why don't you consider this, Nathan? But don't impose your views on me. I won't take kindly to that because there are many, many people in my position. And it's not like I'm sitting on the fence. It's not like I'm, weak minded. I do have strong views as well. It's just that I have strong views on both sides. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. I know this is a very long video. Thank you very much if you've had the patience to listen to all of it. I know most people won't have. But, feel free to do something else while you're listening to it. 5, 6 days ago, This country's fate is in the balance. Let's see what happens. Thanks for watching.